"I'd like to make a toast," Mark announced, raising his glass high. The clinking of silverware and quiet chatter in the dining hall died down instantly. We were gathered inside the Blue Ridge Lodge, tucked away in the mountains of North Carolina. The smell of roasted chicken and warm bread still lingered from dinner, but all attention shifted to my cousin as he stood tall at the head of the long wooden table. His eyes gleamed with the same restless energy I'd seen 100 times before. That familiar spark right before he did something dramatic, the kind of thing that always made the room revolve around him. "To new beginnings," he declared, his voice smooth, confident. "To family, to home." He paused, letting the silence stretch for just a moment too long until it felt deliberate. "And to Grandma Evelyn's memory." A hush fell over the room. At the mention of her name, every breath seemed to grow heavy. My grandmother had been gone barely a week, her absence still raw, the grief fresh as an open wound. I raised my glass slowly, swallowing past the knot in my throat. Around me, my relatives mirrored the motion, heads bowed, lips pressed into solemn lines. For a fleeting moment I thought maybe, just maybe, Mark was going to surprise us with sincerity. But then he lowered his glass and smiled. The kind of smile that always meant trouble. "Speaking of Grandma," he continued, carefully setting his drink down on the polished oak table, "I have an announcement to make." A ripple of curiosity spread across the room. My aunt leaned forward, eyebrows raised. My uncle adjusted his glasses. Elena, my younger cousin, shot me a quick glance from across the table, the kind of glance that silently asked, "Do you know what this is about?" I didn't. But the unease building in my chest told me I wasn't going to like it. Mark reached into the inside pocket of his navy blazer. When his hand emerged, it clutched a folded envelope, the edges worn soft as though it had been carried around for days. He held it up for everyone to see before laying it delicately on the table in front of him, like some sacred relic. "This," he said, his voice carrying effortlessly across the room, "is a letter Grandma gave me before she passed. And in it she left me something very special." My heart stuttered. The words barely made sense, yet the way his eyes flickered, briefly, deliberately, in my direction sent a cold rush down my spine. "You wanted me to notice. You wanted me to feel this." Mark unfolded the letter with exaggerated care, smoothing it flat against the tablecloth. "Her exact words," he began, "were that she wanted me to inherit the family cabin at Lake Juniper. Our cabin. The place we all loved as kids." The room erupted. Gasps, murmurs, congratulations. My aunt clapped her hands to her mouth in shock. My father gave a small, proud smile. Mark's girlfriend beamed and squeezed his arm as though he'd just been crowned king. Meanwhile I sat frozen. The family cabin? That cabin? The one where Grandma taught me to fish, to bake, to sew crooked little stitches while the summer sun spilled through the wide windows? The one where I had spent countless weekends repairing the deck with her, repainting shutters, listening to her stories about resilience, about life, about love? Mark had visited maybe twice in the last 5 years. He always complained about the patchy cell service, about the mosquitoes, about there being nothing to do. But Grandma had given him the cabin? I forced my face into something resembling a smile, though the blood roared in my ears. Every instinct told me something wasn't right. The words didn't fit, the story didn't make sense. And then I remembered. 3 weeks earlier, just days before she passed, Grandma had pressed a small cedar chest into my hands. She had looked at me with eyes tired but still sharp, her voice low but steady. "Claire, don't open this until you truly need to." At the time I hadn't understood. Now, sitting at that table with my cousin waving around a too-perfect letter, I felt the weight of her words pressing on me like a storm rolling in. Something inside me whispered, "This isn't over." Not by a long shot. The applause around the table seemed to last forever. Aunts whispering congratulations, my uncle nodding as if Mark had just been honored by the president. My parents smiled politely, though I noticed my mother's brow furrow slightly, like she couldn't quite fit the pieces together either. I forced my lips into a thin smile, lifted my glass and mouthed congratulations across the table. But my stomach churned. The Lake Juniper cabin wasn't just another piece of property in our family. It was sacred. It was history. Growing up, summers there had been everything to me. Waking up to the smell of pine needles baking in the sun, the creak of the porch swing as Grandma rocked with her crossword puzzles, the distant splash of fish jumping in the lake. I had helped her repaint the shutters emerald green one 4th of July, my hands blistered from the brush but my heart soaring because she kept saying, "Looks better already, doesn't it, Claire?" And I had a rhythm. Every weekend I'd drive the 2 hours from Raleigh just to spend time with her. We baked, we talked, we mended what needed fixing. She'd sit in her worn rocking chair on the porch, teaching me recipes that weren't written down anywhere, stories that no book could hold. Mark. He barely showed up. In fact, I could count on one hand how many times he'd been there since high school. And every time he complained about the lack of Wi-Fi, the boring lake, the creaky old dock. He was a city boy through and through, more interested in craft beer tastings in Charlotte than quiet mornings with a fishing pole. Yet now, in front of everyone, he held that letter like proof of divine right. Elena caught my eye from across the table. Her expression mirrored mine, confusion laced with suspicion. She'd always known how close I was to Grandma, and she also knew Mark's flair for theatrics, and for twisting the truth when it suited him. Still, the rest of the family seemed enchanted. They leaned in, nodding, smiling, already talking about how wonderful it was that Evelyn thought of him that way. I sat frozen, my thoughts racing. It didn't add up. The words of that last conversation with Grandma replayed in my mind like a scratched record. 3 weeks ago, I had gone up to the cabin to spend what we both knew would be one of our final weekends together. She was frighlier than ever, her hands trembling from arthritis, but her eyes still sharp, still full of that quiet wisdom. She'd asked me to fetch her cedar chest from the attic, an old box that smelled faintly of tobacco and lavender. Placing it in my hands, she'd whispered, "Don't open this until you truly need to." At the time, I thought she meant sentimental keepsakes, maybe photographs or letters. I hadn't questioned it. But now, sitting at this long table with Mark waving a pristine letter, every nerve in my body screamed. This was the moment she had meant. My chest tightened. My fork clinked against my plate as I pushed it aside. The noise startled Elena, who mouthed silently, "You okay?" I nodded stiffly, though I wasn't. Not at all. Because the more I thought about it, the more the details clawed at me. Grandma's real handwriting had grown jagged, almost illegible in those last months. She couldn't even write a grocery list without her pen wobbling across the paper. Yet from where I sat, Mark's letter looked smooth, confident, almost too perfect. I couldn't prove it, not yet. But a cold suspicion settled into my bones. Mark was lying. And if he was, then it wasn't just about property. It was about Grandma's memory, her trust, the bond we had built all those years. He was trying to rewrite her final wishes for his own gain. I clenched my hands in my lap, the cedar chest burning like a phantom weight in my memory. I needed to see it again. I needed to know the truth. So when dessert was served and laughter bubbled again around the table, I quietly slipped out my phone under the tablecloth. One new message blinked from Elena. "That letter, it doesn't look right. You notice?" I typed back quickly, my pulse thudding in my ears. "I need to check something at home. Cover for me if I leave. Please." Her reply was instant. "Got it. Do what you need to do." I set down my napkin, stood up and cleared my throat. "Excuse me for a moment," I said, forcing a polite smile. "I'll be right back." But I wasn't going to the bathroom. As I slipped quietly toward the back door of the lodge, my heart hammered with a single thought. If Mark had forged that letter, I was the only one who could prove it. And the truth was waiting for me inside that cedar chest. The night air hit me like a splash of cold water as I stepped out of the lodge. I kept my head down, pulling my coat tighter around me, slipping past parked cars until I reached mine. I didn't even remember the drive back to Raleigh. The highway lights blurred into streaks, my mind looping through every memory of Grandma Evelyn at the cabin. Her laugh when I burned the cornbread. The way she'd point out constellations on the dock at night. The smell of her pipe tobacco long after she'd promised the doctor she'd quit. The more I remembered, the angrier I felt. That cabin was her sanctuary, her soul made wood and stone. There was no universe in which she'd casually hand it to Mark. Not after everything. By the time I pulled into my apartment complex, my hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped my keys. I rushed inside, went straight to the hall closet and pulled down the cedar chest she'd given me. The box was small, no larger than a shoebox, worn smooth with age. The hinges creaked as I carried it to the kitchen table. The faint scent of cedar drifted up, mixed with something else. Lavender, maybe, and the tiniest trace of tobacco. It was so distinctly her that for a moment I had to sit down, my throat tight, my vision blurred. Grandma had known. She had prepared for this. With trembling fingers I opened the chest. Inside everything was carefully arranged. Several folded documents, a sealed envelope with my name written in Grandma's unmistakably shaky script, and a small brass key. My breath caught the moment I saw it. I knew that key. It belonged to the antique roll-top desk in the study at Lake Juniper Cabin, the one she always kept locked. She joked it was where she hid her state secrets. My hands trembled as I unfolded the top document. And there it was, staring me in the face. A notarized deed. The words blurred as tears filled my eyes. Transfer of ownership. Property, Lake Juniper Cabin. From Evelyn M. Harrington to Claire Elf Monroe. Dated 6 months ago. My heart slammed against my ribs. She'd already given it to me. Wiggly. It wasn't even part of her estate. I sank back in the chair, breathless. For weeks Mark had been strutting around, planning, pretending. And all this time Grandma had already made her decision. Next I tore open the sealed envelope addressed to me. Her handwriting wavered across the page, shaky but still so distinctly hers. Asterisk, my dearest Claire. By the time you read this I'll likely be gone. I want you to know that I've already transferred the cabin to you. You've been its true caretaker these past years. Tending it, loving it, preserving the spirit that makes it more than just wood and stone. Mark never showed interest except to complain. I feared he might contest things, which is why I had everything notarized and filed. A copy rests with my lawyer, Daniel Thompson. The cabin is already yours. Please honor it as I know you will. Remember the quiet mornings, the laughter, the lessons. That place holds our history. Protect it. And don't doubt yourself, you were always meant for this. With love, Grandma. Sis. I pressed the letter to my chest, tears spilling freely now. Every word carried her voice, her warmth, her trust in me. But beneath the ache of missing her, fury simmered. Mark knew. The signature on his letter had been too neat, too steady. I could see it now. He had forged her words, banking on everyone's grief to shield him from suspicion. He had gambled on the fact that no one would question the dutiful grandson at the memorial dinner. But I had proof. I wiped my eyes and looked again at the brass key. My pulse quickened. If Grandma had left this for me, then there was more. Something hidden in that desk at the cabin. Something she wanted me and only me to find. I carefully placed the documents back into the cedar chest, slid the key into my pocket and stood. My phone buzzed. A message from Elena. Where did you go? Everyone's still talking about Mark's letter. Honestly, it's weird. You okay? I typed back quickly. I know the truth. I'll explain soon. Just keep them distracted. Her reply came almost instantly. Got it. Want me to stall if they ask? Yes. Please. I stared at the chest on my table, the weight of its secrets pressing down on me. For the first time all evening, my fear gave way to something else. Determination. I wasn't going to let Mark steal Grandma's legacy. The truth was mine to reveal. And tomorrow everyone would hear it. The next evening, I parked a block away from the lodge where the family had gathered again. The cedar chest sat on the passenger seat beside me, the brass key inside, the documents carefully tucked back into place. I ran my fingers over the worn wood, drawing strength from the memory of Grandma's steady gaze when she'd pressed it into my hands. My pulse thundered in my ears. I wasn't the type to cause a scene, but this wasn't about theatrics. This was about the truth, and the truth had to be heard. I walked up the stone steps and knocked on the heavy wooden door. It was Mark who opened it. His confident smirk faltered the second he saw the box in my arms. Work emergency over already? He said, voice strained as if testing how much I knew. We need to talk, I said simply, stepping past him before he could block the way. The living room was warm, crowded with family clustered around the crackling fireplace. My father was inspecting Mark's so-called letter again, my mother discussing possible cabin renovations with his girlfriend, while Elena sat quietly in the corner, watching everything with her sharp eyes. Claire's back, my mother announced, smiling brightly. We were just talking about Mark's wonderful news. Actually, I said, my voice stronger than I felt, that's what I wanted to talk about. I set the cedar chest down on the coffee table. The thud of wood against wood cut through the chatter, and one by one heads turned toward me. Mark's eyes locked on the box. He knew. What's that? He asked, though the tightness in his voice betrayed him. Something Grandma gave me 3 weeks ago, I said evenly. She told me not to open it until the time was right. I think that time is now. The room grew so quiet I could hear the fire popping in the hearth. I unlatched the chest, lifted the lid, and carefully withdrew the notarized deed. My hands didn't tremble this time. 6 months ago, Grandma legally transferred ownership of the Lake Juniper cabin to me, I said, laying the document flat on the table for all to see. It's already mine. It isn't part of her estate. Gasps. My father leaned forward, adjusting his glasses, his brow furrowing as he examined the seal. This is notarized, he confirmed, his voice low but firm. And this, he tapped the signature, is definitely your grandmother's handwriting. I wasn't done. Slowly, deliberately, I pulled out Grandma's letter and placed it beside the deed. She explained everything in her own words, I said. She didn't want confusion. She didn't want arguments. She trusted me to care for the cabin because I've been doing it for years. My mother's mouth opened and closed, words lost. My father sat back heavily as if the air had been knocked out of him. Across the room, Elena's eyes gleamed with vindication. She'd suspected just as I had. And Mark. Mark stood frozen, his face draining of color, his mouth twitching as though caught between denial and anger. That's impossible, he stammered finally. Grandma gave me the cabin. She told me herself. I have her letter. May I see it again? I asked calmly, extending my hand. My father hesitated, then passed the paper to me. I placed it side by side with Grandma's authentic letter from the cedar chest. The contrast was immediate and unmistakable. The genuine letter was shaky, every line uneven, betraying the tremor of arthritis. Mark's version was too clean, too controlled. An imitation. My mother's voice broke the silence, soft but trembling. Mark, did you forge this? All eyes turned to him. His silence stretched, heavy and damning. Finally he looked away. His jaw clenched, his hands balled into fists at his sides. You don't understand, he burst out, his voice sharp, desperate. It's not fair. Claire got everything. She was always Grandma's favorite. Always there, always the perfect granddaughter. What did I get? Nothing. Just scraps of her attention while you all praised her. The words poured from him like water breaking through a dam, years of resentment spilling into the room. This was my chance, he shouted. My chance to finally matter. And you, he jabbed a finger toward me, you just couldn't let me have it. The room fell into stunned silence. My mother pressed a hand to her mouth, tears shining in her eyes. My father looked at Mark as though seeing him for the first time, his disappointment etched into every line of his face. Mark, he said quietly, forging your grandmother's signature isn't just wrong. It's a crime. Mark's girlfriend shifted uncomfortably, her smile long gone. She stood, avoiding his eyes, and murmured, I think I should go. Within seconds she was out the door, the sound of it closing like a gavel striking. The fire crackled. The silence deepened. I looked at my cousin, my rival, my brother in all but name, and for the first time I didn't feel just anger. I felt the weight of his loneliness, his envy, his desperate hunger to be seen. But none of that excused what he'd done. The truth was out, and it had shattered everything. Mark's chest heaved, his fists still clenched at his sides. His face was flushed crimson, eyes glistening with a mix of rage and shame. No one spoke. The silence weighed on all of us like a stone. Finally I broke it. Mark, I said softly, though my voice carried through the room, Grandma didn't forget about you. He scoffed, bitter and sharp. Oh right. That's why she handed you everything and left me to fake my way into being part of this family. Don't lie to me, Claire. She never cared. But I wasn't lying. Slowly, deliberately I reached back into the cedar chest. My fingers brushed past the deed and my own letter until they found it. Another sealed envelope. The name on the front was written in Grandma's unmistakably shaky hand. I held it up so everyone could see. This is addressed to you. Mark froze. His eyes narrowed, suspicion warring with something deeper. What is that? A letter Grandma left, I said simply. For you. The room stilled again. My mother leaned forward, her lips parted in shock. My father straightened in his chair, the disappointment on his face softened by a flicker of curiosity. Mark stared at the envelope as though it were a snake. He didn't move. Go on, I urged gently, extending it toward him. It's yours. For a moment I thought he wouldn't take it. but slowly, as if his hands weighed 100 pounds, he reached out and accepted the envelope. His fingers trembled as he broke the seal. The sound of tearing paper seemed impossibly loud in the quiet room. Mark unfolded the letter and began to read. His expression shifted as his eyes moved across the page. First wary, then startled, then slowly, painfully crumbling into something raw. After what felt like an eternity, his voice cracked. She knew, he whispered. She always knew. He sank into the armchair, the letter shaking in his hands. What does it say? My mother asked softly, almost afraid of the answer. Mark hesitated, his jaw tight. Then, with a trembling breath, he handed it over. Read it. Everyone should hear. My mother unfolded the letter and adjusted her glasses, her hands trembling as she began to read aloud. Asterisk, Dear Mark. If you are holding this letter, then Claire has opened the cedar chest, which means one of two things. Either I am gone, or something has forced her to reveal what I entrusted to her. I want you to know that my decision about the cabin was not a matter of favorites or fairness. It was about preservation. Claire loved the cabin for what it was, not as property but as memory. She cared for it, tended it, gave it life. You never found joy in its quiet corners, and that's nothing to be ashamed of. But it would not have been right to give it to someone who saw it only as an obligation. What you need, Mark, is not the cabin. What you need is purpose, recognition, a sense that your life matters. And for that, I have left you something different. Enclosed with this letter is a check for $20,000. Use it not to chase what was never meant for you but to build something that is. Open that restaurant ID you once spoke of. Take a course. Travel somewhere that stirs your soul. You were never unloved. You were never overlooked. But sometimes, my dear boy, love looks different than the way we expect it to. With love, Grandma Evelyn. Sis. When she finished, my mother's voice cracked, tears glistening in her eyes. The room was silent again, but this silence was different. Heavier. Sadder. Mark stared at the floor, his hands still clutching the check that had slipped out of the envelope. His face was pale, his eyes wet, his bravado gone. She saw right through me, he whispered. Even from the grave. No one moved. No one spoke. Because in that moment, it wasn't just about the cabin anymore. It was about years of jealousy, of resentment, of unspoken wounds that no one in our family had dared to confront. And Grandma, in her quiet, steady way, had forced them all into the open. Mark sat slumped in the armchair, shoulders bowed as though the weight of the letter pressed him into the cushions. His eyes stayed fixed on the check in his trembling hands, but I could see something breaking behind them, not just guilt but grief. No one spoke for several long moments. The fire popped, logs collapsing into glowing embers. My mother sniffled quietly, dabbing at her eyes with the edge of a napkin. My father's stern expression softened, though disappointment still lingered in the corners of his mouth. Finally, Mark lifted his gaze, meeting mine across the room. His voice was rough, broken. I'm sorry, Claire. The words hung there, fragile, like glass that might shatter if anyone breathed too hard. I'm sorry for forging that letter. For lying. For trying to take something that wasn't mine. His throat tightened, he swallowed hard. But more than that, I'm sorry for all the years I spent resenting you. For letting jealousy eat me alive while you were just being there. Being who she needed. I hadn't expected him to say it. For so long, Mark had lived behind sarcasm, bravado, sharp jabs designed to cover every insecurity. To see him stripped bare, admitting what we'd both known but never named, made my chest ache. I wanted to stay angry. Part of me did. But I could hear Grandma's voice in my head, the one that always came when I wrestled with forgiveness. The truth doesn't need to shout, Claire. And forgiveness, well, forgiveness isn't for them. It's for you. You hurt me, I said softly. Not just tonight. For years, Mark. You dismissed everything I cared about. You mocked the cabin, the time I spent with Grandma, like it was silly or pointless. And then you tried to steal it. That's not something I can just forget overnight. He nodded quickly, shame coloring his face. I know. I don't expect you to forgive me. Not now. Maybe not ever. But I needed you to hear me say it. For the first time in years, I believed him. I took a slow breath, steadying myself. Then I reached into the cedar chest once more. Beneath the letters and documents, wrapped in an old handkerchief, was a small leather photo album. I laid it gently on the table and flipped it open. Images spilled out. Mark and me as kids on the cabin dock, our faces sticky with marshmallow from s'mores. Mark holding up a crooked fish with Grandma grinning beside him. The three of us on the porch swing, her arms around us like we were the only two people in the world. She kept these, I said, turning the album so he could see. Every photo. Every memory. She never stopped believing you'd come back around, Mark. She never stopped hoping. His lips trembled as he reached forward, brushing his fingers over a faded picture of us building sandcastles by the water. He blinked hard, his jaw clenched as though fighting the wave of emotion threatening to overtake him. I really messed up, he whispered. Yes, I said plainly. You did. The words hit him like a slap, but then I softened. But Grandma clearly thought you could do better. And so do I. He looked at me then, really looked like he was seeing his cousin for the first time in years, not just the rival he'd built up in his mind. His eyes were red, wet but earnest. You're still welcome at the cabin, I said carefully. Not as its owner, but as family. If you're willing to respect it, and her, the door is open. For a moment his face crumpled. Then he nodded once, hard, pressing his lips together. Thank you, he whispered. It wasn't absolution. It wasn't full forgiveness. But it was a beginning. And somehow in that moment, with Grandma's letters between us and her memory heavy in the air, it felt like exactly what she would have wanted. The following morning I drove north toward Lake Juniper. The road wound through the Blue Ridge Mountains, sunlight spilling through the pines in long golden ribbons. The cedar chest sat beside me on the passenger seat, silent but heavy with everything it had revealed. As I turned onto the gravel driveway, the cabin came into view, weathered cedar siding, emerald shutters faded from sun and rain, the wide porch wrapping around like open arms. My breath caught. It looked exactly as it had the last time I'd been here with Grandma, down to the porch swing swaying lazily in the breeze. I parked and just sat there for a moment, staring. This place wasn't just wood and nails. It was memory, history, love woven into every board. And now it was mine to protect. When I stepped inside, the air smelled faintly of lavender and pipe tobacco, a scent I hadn't realized I'd missed until it filled me again. Dust motes floated in the sunlight streaming through the big lake-facing windows. On the mantel above the fireplace sat her old clock, still ticking softly. In the corner, her rocking chair waited, angled toward the view as if she'd only stepped out for a moment. I walked slowly from room to room, my fingers trailing along familiar furniture, every creak of the floorboards like an echo of her voice. It wasn't empty. It was alive with her presence. Finally, I carried the brass key to the study. The roll-top desk stood in its corner, polished but scarred with decades of use. My hands shook as I slid the key into the lock. The mechanism resisted for a second, then clicked. Inside were neat compartments filled with envelopes, photographs, newspaper clippings. I pulled open one drawer and found labeled folders. One for me, one for Mark, one for each family member. She had kept everything. Our graduation programs, birthday cards, even clippings of Mark's first restaurant review from years ago when he'd only joked about pursuing food seriously. She had been proud of him. She had been proud of all of us. I sat at her desk and opened the folder with my name. Inside was a letter I'd written her at 12, scrawled in purple pen, promising I'd take care of the cabin forever. She'd saved it. My chest tightened, tears welling again. Outside, the lake glittered under the morning sun. I carried a mug of coffee onto the porch and sat on the swing. The wood creaked under my weight, familiar and comforting. Birds called from the trees, and the gentle lap of water against the dock filled the silence. I closed my eyes. For a moment I could almost feel her beside me. "I'll take care of it, Grandma," I whispered. "I promise." My phone buzzed. A text from Mark. "Can we meet at the cabin soon? Just us. I want to see it again. And I want to try. For real this time." I stared at the message for a long time, torn between hesitation and hope. Finally I typed back. "Yes. Come next weekend. Bring your work gloves. The dock needs fixing." His reply came quickly. "Deal." I set the phone aside and looked out over the lake. The water stretched endless and calm, reflecting the morning sky. For the first time in weeks I felt peace settle inside me. The cabin was mine. But it was more than that. It was a bridge. A chance to heal. And as the sunlight spilled across the porch, warming my face, I realized that maybe, just maybe, Grandma had been right all along. The door should always stay open.